My apple butter pie recipe is easy and delicious. With store-bought apple butter, pre-made pie crust, and a few other ingredients, you can make an amazing old-fashioned dessert that everyone will love. Let's go over the ingredients. Here in this bowl, I have 6 tablespoons of unsalted butter, 85 grams, to which I'm going to add 1 cup of apple butter, according to the jar, 270 grams, a quarter cup of white sugar, as I measure 53 grams, a quarter cup of light brown sugar, as I measure 60 grams, 1 tablespoon of lemon juice, a quarter teaspoon of cinnamon, a quarter teaspoon of ginger, and 1/8 of a teaspoon of nutmeg, 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt, 2 large eggs, and then a 9-inch pie crust over there. I am using homemade, but you can use store-bought. I put it into the pie dish and it is unbaked. It is still raw. Like I said, my apple butter pie recipe is super easy. All we have to do is melt the butter and then add the other ingredients to the butter to make the filling. Pour the filling into the unbaked pie shell and then put it into the oven. I am going to melt the butter in the microwave and then I will bring you back. Now that the butter is melted, it's time to add the other ingredients to make the filling. The only thing to keep in mind is that you want to add the eggs last. Number 1, so you can taste it and adjust the sugar or spices if needed. And also number 2, you don't want to accidentally cook the eggs by adding them to the hot butter. So because of that, we're going to add everything else first in order to bring down the temperature. Starting out with the apple butter. I'll scrape this off camera. I don't want to annoy you with the noise. But honestly, it doesn't matter what order you add everything in. Like I said, just as long as the eggs are last. Spices, I'm not adding a ton of spices because the brand of apple butter that I'm using is pretty flavorful. So what I recommend is that you definitely need to taste the apple butter first and see what you think. If you think maybe it just needs a couple tablespoons of sugar, or maybe it needs more ginger, no cinnamon. This is a recipe you're gonna have to adjust based on the apple butter that you use. I tasted the filling, and even though it's good, I think it's not quite sweet enough for me. Some people might think it's good as it is, but I'm going to add 2 extra tablespoons of white sugar. So another 30 grams. Now I like the level of sweetness in the filling, so I'm going to go ahead and add my 2 large eggs. Like I said, add them last so that you can taste the filling, see if you want to add a little more sugar or spices, and also so that you don't cook them. Now that the filling is ready, all I have to do is pour it into my unbaked pie shell. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure the filling is in the pie evenly. Then I'm going to put this into the oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit, uncovered. I'll let you know for how long. I highly recommend putting it on a pan, a pizza pan like I'm doing, or a cookie sheet, because it's going to make it a lot easier to take in and out of the oven. My apple butter pie just came out of the oven. It was in at 350 degrees Fahrenheit, uncovered, for 45 minutes. It smells incredible. Although I definitely liked the golden brown crust, I honestly wasn't sure what I thought about the filling. Apple butter is normally brown, so I guess I shouldn't have been too surprised by the color, but I felt like the filling looked kind of unappetizing, so I was really curious to give it a try. And when I took the first bite, I knew that in spite of its brownish, somewhat unattractive color, this apple butter pie recipe was a big success because it tasted delicious. As you would expect, this pie tasted like apple butter. A lot of spices and brown sugar, but with still a good amount of apple in the background. Although I guess you might be able to make this pie without adding any extra sugar or spices, I honestly think that you should because the eggs and the butter and the filling are going to mute the flavors, so they need a little bit of extra help to stand out. And in regards to the spices and sugar, I think I added just the right amount. It wasn't over or under spiced, and I didn't feel like it was overly sweet or not sweet enough. Those 2 extra tablespoons of white sugar are optional. Most people would probably think it would be okay without those, but with the extra spices, I think I nailed it perfectly. I also really like the texture. Now that I'm holding a piece up close to the camera, you can see that the filling was soft but not mushy, and it was firm but not too firm. I felt like it was just perfect because it was soft enough to remind you of the texture of apple butter, but firm enough to hold its shape and let you slice the pie neatly. Together with a crispy pie crust, this pie had a great combination of not only flavors but also textures. So in short, although at first I was a bit unsure about this pie because of the color of the filling, it tasted amazing. Although this recipe was a big success, there are a couple of things that I wanted to point out. Like I said, I felt like I added just the right amount of sugar and extra spices, but every brand of apple butter is different. Some have more or less sugar, more or fewer spices, so I recommend tasting the apple butter first and then adjusting accordingly. That said, I do think that this recipe has measurements that should work with most types of apple butter. Another thing I wanted to point out is that I tasted the filling before I baked the pie, and honestly, I felt like the filling was very buttery. I honestly thought that maybe I had ruined this pie by adding too much butter, but once the pie baked, cooled, and I took the first bite, I noticed that that butter flavor just faded into the background. So if you're worried about it tasting too buttery, don't, because like I said, that butter flavor will just fade into the background. If you watch my channel, you know that a few years ago, I made an applesauce pie recipe that was very similar to this one. Although they're both phenomenal, I'd say that the applesauce pie is just a little bit better. So if you like the idea of this one, but you want the best, in my opinion, I would go with the applesauce pie. But honestly, they're both really good. And what's great about this recipe is that all you have to do is open a jar of apple butter, add some extra ingredients, pour the filling into a pie shell, and bake. This is probably one of the best pie recipes in terms of flavor and ease, so it would be perfect for Thanksgiving, Christmas, or another holiday meal when you want a really good dessert, but you're too tired from all the other cooking. So if you make this recipe, I know you'll like it. I have more great Thanksgiving pie recipes coming soon, so stay tuned. As always, thanks for watching. See you next time.